Hola, chicas y compañeros, and thank you so much for hitting play or clicking on whatever you had to click on to join this podcast. My name is Stone Meredith, and I am the founder of the Clever Chicas Project. I really appreciate you listening. If you've listened to any of our work before, you know our goal is to share information with folks who are committed to our cause. And just a little reminder, Clever Chicas is a project that celebrates ordinary women doing extraordinary things. And we're often flanked by our compañeros, that Spanish word for the guys in our life who stand alongside us as equals and try to help us fight the good fight in our mission to make the world a better place. And today's a really big day for me because, as many of you may know, I have spent since about 1999 doing my best to become a teacher and a critical thinker. And the professor joining us today, Dr. Marsha Lee Baker, is the reason that I've done that. So if you had me for a class and thought I was a little too hard, here's the lady you can thank for that. Dr. Marsha Lee Baker worked with me in my master's program at Western Carolina University, Go Catamounts. She really taught me the idea that it is important to lead with your heart and to listen to your students, and that together we can all make the world a better place. And so today she has decided to give her time to us graciously. And we just want to say to you, welcome, Marsha Lee Baker, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is a thrill, a joy, a pleasure, and I'm your biggest fan, Stone.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Well, so it's nice to know if I were to only have one fan and I could have picked one, it would have been you. So something's worked out today, hasn't it?
Yeah, and fortunately, you've got about, I don't know, an uncountable number of fans, and many of them clever chicas.
Yeah, yes, and we are you and I have been working and talking and thinking together for a little bit over 20 years, and it's important, I think, to remember that when I came to you, I didn't really understand what rhetoric and composition were. And so to that end, if it'd be all right with you, tell us a little bit about what that means to you and what you saw your work and your career like. Tell us a little about who you are and what rhetoric and composition means to you.
Wow. Okay.
And a big one right out of the gate.
Let's start with the most important thing. Well, really, rhetoric and composition were always very important to me, but I didn't really know that. I didn't know to call it that until I got to graduate school. But how I ended up going to graduate school in Rhet Comp Studies is that I and this sounds corny and a little over the top maybe, but it's the darn truth. Well, I think from a very early age, I already got that notion of to be here. I'm here on this earth to make it a better place. And the other part of that for me was that I always had something in my mind and heart about peace and nonviolence. And I can't trace it back. I've been doing a lot of memoir writing things, trying to think, well, how did I end up this way? And I've had people ask me that before, and I think that's how I was when I got here. It's the only answer I can really honestly say. So when I got to most of the things I wanted to do in life before I ever thought about, I thought a lot about teaching, but I really never thought I'd go to graduate school and be at a university. But I thought about communication and how we talk with each other. And it just seemed to me that if we could learn to communicate with each other better, that we would be less likely to kill each other. I just thought, we just don't understand each other enough. And so when I got to graduate school, by then, once I decided and I figured, okay, I must be in an English department somewhere. And I started looking at curricula at different schools. And I kept looking for, where are the courses in writing? Where's all that, And I was seeing a lot of literature courses, which of course obviously meant that somebody wrote, but I was not so much wanting to learn how to read and study literature is I wanted to understand, how do we learn how to do that with each other? How do we write and talk with each other, so that we're more able to live with each other, less likely to kill? More words, less swords. More words, less swords. Or I don't think I made that up, but I made it up in my head a long time ago. So if I'm getting there, to try to answer your question or respond to it, Stone, it's that I got to rhetoric and composition because I want to make the world a more peaceable place.
And when you say this rhetoric and composition, you know, if you look at the history of ideas and the history of rhetoric is kind of something, just to get a definition going, rhetoric is something we use to communicate, but also kind of there's that implication that it's persuadable, right? And rhetoric can be something spoken or written, but composition kind of implies that construction of it, doesn't it? Can you talk a little bit about the difference in the two words?
Yes, I can. And I also want to talk about the connection between the two words.
Okay.
Rhetoric is, as we study it, and it's is understood as a part of ancient study, ancient philosophy. Rhetoric is how we go about, it's about persuasion. The art of persuasion is one of the most common definitions. But in more recent times, one of the definitions I learned, let me see if I can get this word, rhetoric is the art of or the art of the study of misunderstandings and their remedies.
Oh,
And
I love that.
That is, I will have to go back and look at that is Wayne Booth.
Okay, that makes sense.
I think it's Wayne Booth. Okay. It seemed like I fell in love with all the rhetors and teachers whose last name began with B.
That's true. Education. As somebody who's had a class, that's true.
Yeah, Booth, Burke, Berthoff, you just name them. So if we, and that when I grabbed hold of that definition, I thought, oh my gosh, if we can use rhetoric, whatever this big term is, to help us repair or undo or not have some misunderstandings with each other, well, that sounds peaceable to me. That sounds like I would be less likely to hurt somebody's feelings or get in a fight, or I would know how to be a diplomat so that I could do more verbal negotiation across the table, to keep us from killing each other out in the fields. So that's how I began to start making the connections from ancient rhetoric to more modern contemporary rhetoric as a means, but what kind of means for persuasion? We get to choose. And so I think that's part of how I approached education. What choices can we make? What rhetorical choices can we make? And how can we figure out how did something go well and how did it not? I will have conversations about violent situations with someone someone, and they'll go, yeah, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? How do you stop that? And I'm being a little tongue in cheek with that. It's sometimes really serious conversations, but that's a quick comeback. We ought not enter this war. We ought not have that neighborhood conflict. We ought not, well, yeah, but what are you going to do about it? Well, I think understanding rhetoric and the conversations that we share, what we say, what we listen to, what we don't listen to, what we don't say, that we can learn how to make kind, loving, understandable, humane choices. And we can learn how to stop making the bad ones.
And so is that how rhetoric ties to composition? What is the field of composition, and why is it not just all rhetoric?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. And I guess at least from 50s and 60s on, I think some rhetoricians were starting to ask that question in America, and then a lot of compositionists named themselves and began asking that question. And it's like I'm thinking about when you're a student, and from K through wherever on, and you're taught to write. And at some point in our education, we stop and say, how come I'm having to write this? Why do I have to write? I don't like to write. I don't know how to write. I love to write. I want to write a novel. I want to write poems. I want to write haiku. I don't ever want to write anything, and so we start all these notions really early on about what it is to write and what it means and why we do it. And so as that became more part of education's curriculum, and as it became more important in higher education, it became really more of its field. And it's about how do you teach people? How do you learn to compose, to write? Who are you writing it to, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, this had a lot of relationship with what is still communication studies.
Okay.
And, and so there was communication studies. And so that was very often teaching communication orally. You and I are having this conversation. Somebody might go back and listen to what we said and how we said it in this oral conversation. We could also be writing this up. And so somewhere 20th century, depending on where you want to name it, we also started looking at that in terms of writing. So communications became oral and composition became written kinds of communication. And when that split happened is when I think about how vitally important, rhetoric would have been vitally important to both of those fields. And it was, and it still is. But that's when I think in our country, we really learned you can't just teach writing without teaching rhetoric. And it took compositionists who knew about rhetoric and rhetoricians who would talk with us to understand the imperative of that connection. They're really not separable. And if we teach them separately or don't teach one without the other, we're missing the boat. We're missing half the big picture. So then I could say, well, you might want to ask, but because then I could talk about how all the ways of rhetoric, what rhetoric helps us learn at the most core, essential level. How does that then serve us when we're teaching composition?
Yeah, because rhetoric, I mean, sometimes, especially if you've lived in the world for the last generation and watched some of the changes that have happened. And so I'm just doing a little aside here to get back to this point, and you and I are kind of famous for doing that together. But if we look, we're talking about America, and if we look after the GI Bill, made it possible for so many of our returning soldiers to come home and get an education. That's where we really see in our culture the beginning of the writing center and the beginning of these support services that we're so proud. For example, Western Carolina had such an amazing writing center. You and I had such great experiences there. But that's really where that tradition comes from, isn't it? That we put more of our soldiers, and of course most of them male, after World War II, right? But we see this beginning where the GI Bill makes it possible for folks who didn't grow up maybe going to a nice, well-equipped K through 12 situation where they would have been taught rhetoric and composition. Maybe they went to a basic old high school where they weren't really teaching that. And so we see this real rise of what are often called supplemental or remedial services until we get to maybe the 70s and start saying, oh, wait, gosh, everybody needs to learn this. But that's kind of the origin. I think it's important for our audience to realize how new and kind of really to how American that idea is, that we would want to allow everyone access to kind of get on the same page to learn how to write to those same expectations of composition. And that's why, Marsha, it jumped out so much to me when you were talking about in the 50s. That's a real important moment for the rhetoricians who teach that art of persuasion and the compositionists who teach those skills of composing it was really kind of a fortuitous thing for them to come together at that moment, wasn't it?
Beyond fortuitous. Yes, yes. It, it now seems so essential, so necessary. Yes, it was a magnificent explosion.
And it's hard to
Magnificent.
imagine now, I think, Marsha, that if I go to school and I don't understand commas, the expectation, no matter where in America we are, is that there's a way for me to learn how to do those commas, right? Whether we go to our teacher and say, please help me, whether we go
Mm-hmm.
to a tutor, or whether we go to one of the thousands of static handouts that are now in online writing centers. Most colleges and universities, from community colleges through Ivy League, have what they call online writing centers, where anyone can type in comma rules. For example, let's say that if you type in comma rules, you can learn comma rules, not just comma rules, right? You can learn them for APA format, American Psychological APA citation. You can learn them for MLA. You can learn all kind of comma rules for free on your phone, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah.
which is just the most basic sentence level construction. But you can also type in how to organize an academic paper, how to every
Mm-hmm.
single level of composition. And keep in mind, y'all, that we're, as Marsha pointed out, we're talking about from the 1950s forward. So in less than 70 years, we're talking about an explosion where anybody who has access to online technology can really learn how to compose in any way possible. And then you add also the great resources. We were talking earlier today about the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And for anyone who is interested in learning about rhetoric, I really encourage you to type in Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and Rhetoric. Just type in that key search, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, STANFORD, Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Stanford University in California is the host. If you type in Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and Rhetoric, it will take you to the beginning where you can study the history of rhetoric in little one-page handouts for free. So
Yeah.
that we would have gone forward. And if you think, I think, Marsha, about where we've come as a culture, where Benjamin Franklin, as we're founding our country, is saying, hey, you guys, let's make some free libraries. So that's a big turn, right?
Yes, 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 yes. Because uh, I mean, that's why I can understand why still there are literature and composition and rhetoric courses in many English departments, not all, but because it's writing and reading, you serves each other. Writers read other writers, novelists read other novelists, etc. And even those of us who write nonfiction or academic discourse, we don't just read in our particular kind, genre type of writing. So it's the double edges of literacy.
That's exactly it, of literacy. And so, when we joke about, oh, the kids are just texting with their thumbs and where's our future going, there's
Mhm,
another way to look at it, right? There's this idea that, well, Benjamin Franklin did make the library free a few hundred years ago. And now
mhm,
anybody who has access to internet, and you can get that at one of those libraries, right? You can walk
mhm.
into any library just about in the country and say, I'd like to learn how to write. I'm going to go over here on this computer and look up how to do it and work on it and teach myself. That's really potential, isn't it?
Yes, 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 yes. And just I gotta anytime that the notion of libraries or librarians comes up, I just have to just take a pause and say, let me just sing the praises of librarians.
Oh,
I have
please do.
never, I have never, I've never had any sort of any kind of somebody, whether they're in education or not, but a librarian is like the gift of gifts when it comes to someone who will talk with me about my ideas, talk with me about the information I want, talk with me now about the technological resources that I still haven't learned how to maneuver. And librarians, here's kind of an irony is that librarians are so wicked smart and know how to find stuff. They know stuff and they know how to find stuff. And they are the most kind, friendly, hang with you people I have ever known.
I
I
could
mean,
not agree
so,
more.
I mean, I'm thinking about people who might be a little timid about the whole thing, or I don't know, a library or librarian, I don't even know one, or I don't want to talk with them, or they're going to think I'm, ignorant or whatever, or, I go, you don't know that by now? Oh, no, they're never that way. It's just a beautiful section of humanity.
And the idea too that for anyone, I'm learning now. As Marsha knows, because she's watched him grow up. I have a 24-year-old son, and it's shocking to me how many of these kids have gone through high school and college, and they're like, "Yeah, I don't go to the library. Yeah, I've not been to the library." And if they
Uh-huh.
went once as an undergrad, and then especially during COVID, when the libraries opened up, I said, "Why don't you go to the library and ask the librarian about whatever?" And they learn all the resources that are also in the library. So maybe you want to go, and it's not just go check out a book. Maybe you want to go to the librarian and say, "Hey, I'm trying to research how to write. Could you help me do that?" And they will actually sit down in all our 50 states and territories and help you get on that computer with Wi-Fi and learn how to do whatever it is you want to do in ways that are so complementary. I will tell you, don't talk in a loud voice. They're not going to love that. But that's kind of really the only requirement, that you go in and speak with them in a rather hushed tone, and you can find out anything you want to. So if you're in a position where you don't have access to Wi-Fi, or if you say, "I'd really like to learn more about rhetoric and composition, I'd really like to learn more about going to college, I'd really like to learn more about planting a watermelon," whatever the case may be, you can go into the library. Thank you, Benjamin Franklin. I do still have a little crush on him, by the way, Marsha, in case you can't tell, but you can go into the library and learn about it. And that's one of the great merits of this country. And that's kind of a major part of what we're getting at. And what I still love all these years later about your work, Marsha, is that you and I could get on here today and say, "Boy, America's a real drag. Everything's just so expensive and everybody's got COVID and what a creepy place." And you know what, Marsha? We could use rhetoric to compose a case that supported that argument, and you and I could leave with a stomach ache and a headache and be mad by the time we got to the grocery store, couldn't we?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We could
Yes,
do that,
we
but what
could do that, but we know other ways.
we know
Yes.
other ways. And that
Yes.
gets at something that I think is really important that I continue to learn and unpack with you. And that's this idea of, we have tools and we have choices. And that's one thing I love about education, is that maybe somebody knows more than I do. Like Marsha knows more about those bee thinkers than I'll ever know, Bertolf Burke, all those people than I'll ever know, even though I'm trying. But I know me, and I know what I'm interested in, and I know my life that I've experienced. And so I can come together with somebody who knows more, or somebody who's interested on the same topic, and we can make choices to come up and try to be better. And I think that's one of the most important things about rhetoric and composition, is that sometimes the less you know about a subject, the more helpful you can be in conducting research and trying to compose a stance on a topic. Now, I know that sounds crazy, Marsha, but do you think there's some truth in it?
I think so. If I understand what you're saying, the less you know, the more, wait a minute, the less you know, the more you can find out,
And the more open, I think sometimes
the more
it's,
open you can be. Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
because I think sometimes, for example, if you've taught the same class 80 times and you're looking for the same stuff 80 times, you can get kind of stale. And so for me, for example, one of the main reasons I teach is so that I don't get stale. It's because every term, new people with new eyes are going to come in, and some of them are English majors, and some of them like to write, and some of them don't like to write. But it's really that culmination of perspectives that makes the answer to the same questions every semester different, right?
Yes, yes. Yes. And that to learn, I mean, whoever's teaching, when we're teaching, we're learning from other people's curiosity. They bring up a question or I mean, I can't think of a quick example right this second, but I've learned lots of things about fields that I never would have known about when my undergraduate students would pick some part of some chemistry thing. I can remember one young man in a class who wrote about, it was very smart in the sciences and did some sort of really interesting report about something that was happening in the chemistry field at the time. And I'm sure he was learning about this in his science studies. And it was just fascinating, just fascinating. I talked with a young woman not long ago at it was either Waffle House or Huddle House. I can't remember. And anyway, she was working there while she goes to school at Western. And she started talking. She was in biology. I always ask people what they're studying. And she says, I'm also interested in particular, and I don't know the exact terminology or pronunciation, but it was basically fungus or fungi and how all that functions. Well, lo and behold, I had just read an interview with somebody who he and his father both are big shots in fungus research. And so I had this big old conversation with her, and I just said, I read this article, and she's so excited to know somebody else knows about it. And we just go to town on that. And I managed to get that magazine article, a copy back over to her, give me another excuse to go back and get biscuits and gravy.
Now the motive comes out.
I would have never, if you had asked, I mean, I'm too prissy and picky. Yeah, fungus, but evidently the world depends on it. I mean, that was what I could basically, she's so excited about what I was getting. We can't function without fungus or fungi. What some of y'all out there listening, hopefully will forgive me and correct me for how to say all that, but I'm glad to know that it exists and it's important. And some young, fabulous woman is studying it.
Well, but I think you're getting at a point here that is really key that students ask me all the time, all ages. The young elementary and middle and high school kids at the Boys and Girls Club in Somerville ask, and my grad students sometimes still ask too when I ask things of them, and that is, why do we have to write things in essays, and why do you keep saying it has to be written a certain way, and why do I have to cite it, and why do I have to do this, and why do I have to do that? And that's such a great real world example. I can tell y'all something right now. Marsha's not going to get her hands in dirty, much less get fungus on them, because she is a girly girl, and I am her tomboy sidekick. That is a fact.
Yes.
But she got at this idea that it was rhetoric and composition. It was someone composed an article that this rhet comp scholar was interested in, read it, and therefore could have a dialogue and exchange of ideas. And so, anybody who's ever gone to school, I want you to think about it. The teacher gets up there and teaches you something. And there's really two kinds of knowledge. I either need you to be able to produce something, so what are the letters of the alphabet? I'm going to give you a quiz, and I need you to write all 26 letters out. There's 26, right? Yes, 26. I need you to write all 26 letters out. And so I just need, boom, you better be able to recall all 26 of those letters. No questions asked. There's no right or wrong answers, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever. Okay. So there's that kind of test. But the other kind of test, which is more comprehension based, getting into kind of a more linguistics take on it. So can you produce? I can just produce something. What's 1 + 1? It's 2. So there's that production based learning. And we see a lot of that in the sciences, A + B = C. And, that kind of stuff where there's a right answer, where I just need you to fill in the blank or do a matching or whatever. And that kind of stuff, somebody like me never liked it. And I'll tell you a funny story about that in a minute. But there's two kinds of learning. And then there's that comprehension-based learning, a linguist might call it. And that's where, did you really comprehend it to the point where you can to say it in kind of a country way, can you explain it back to somebody else? And that's what that comprehension-based learning means. And so for anyone who's ever been asked to write a short answer question or been asked to write a paper in a biology class, you're like, hello, there's not a multiple choice here. This is biology. that's really what we're getting at. And it's really a very ancient tradition that Plato and Aristotle, so going back to, over 2,000 years, it's this idea that when you're asked to write in an essay at school, it's so that we can measure on a rubric. And you know how I hate that word, but we need them, because how well do I know how well you remembered what I told you about fungi or fungus or however you say it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I give you an essay and I say in 300 to 500 words, explain A, B, and C and use evidence. So is that, why do we make kids write at school? It's so that we can measure them. That's the teacher side. But the other side, Marsha, will you talk a little bit about what happens when somebody has to go out and learn something and then organize it in a composition?
Yes, I can. Um, okay, hold that for a minute. I got something else I want to say about this
Okay.
comprehension. And do you mind if because I want to go back and pick up on a couple of thoughts. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Okay, because it's not unconnected to what you're saying. Well, I was just thinking, in your last comment, I thought, if I'd gone back and just written down a few notes about what I read in that that magazine article, and then made notes from what this young woman who's studying in biology had said, if I'd written just notes, I would be able to tell you more about fungus right this minute. But I didn't. But I think that's an amazing I guess it's a human brain biological reality, is that when we read it and then we write about it, what that does to our knowledge and even our imagination and our creativity. I might be planting fungi out on my backyard. I don't know, but I mean, it changes your life. I mean, that's kind of a minor example. But I want to talk about, though, when we talk about the content and the correctness, and when we talk about all those wonderful sources, Stone, you were saying you can go learn about commas and punctuation and structure and the whole 9 yards. There's so much there. Nobody has to grieve over documentation. Nobody has to memorize how to document their source, because we've got manuals that show us how to do that. You never have to memorize it, just go look it up. You don't ever have to remember where to use a comma or not, just go look it up if you keep forgetting. I finally memorized some of the rules because I get tired of looking stuff up. I want to just go know the rule. I mean, I just want to know it and know. This is the thing about, for instance, commas. Punctuation is part of our rhetoric. Punctuation communicates something. And I think that's one of the great pieces that the combination of rhetoric and composition brings to writing and reading. And who's learning it and who's teaching it. I don't put a comma after the beginning of a word unintentionally. And I use a semicolon instead of a period intentionally. So if we understand that all of that stuff, which sooner or later is often categorized as the minutia or the pickiness or the rules that sort of drag us down as writers, if we understand that we're communicating with that, then it becomes a lot more meaningful. You're willing to do that part, and you will start paying attention to it and see how other writers are doing it. So I like to think about, and I would try to teach my students, and this is from all levels of education I taught, that there's your commas and then there's your concept, and both are equally important. You have to have content and you have to have correctness. And I had so many first year college students say to me, they straight out of high school into college, and they would say, "Oh, I don't write," or "I can't write," or things like that. And I would say, "Well, what do you mean?" "Well, I can't spell." Well, it's as if spelling has turned out to be everything that writing is. That's not so. Or if I, read someone's writing and it's real clear that they're struggling so hard with punctuation, they don't know what we would consider a complete sentence or not. So I say, well, let's read this through, and I have them read it out loud. And I'll say, what are you trying to get across here? Let's see if it would help if you. And when we talk about it, they start to get, yeah, there's a concept here. I did want to put a period there, or I did need to learn that. Or when I read it out loud, I realized it was confused. It would be confusing to somebody who, so, okay. So they come in and they're all worried about all the correctness and the detail of writing. And so you have to, I think, help put that in perspective for especially young writers who are so overwhelmed with that. And I would always say, oh, blah, blah. I would always say, it sounds like such an old teacher. Okay, but I mean, yes, all that correctness is important. I don't disagree with your high school teacher or your elementary ed teacher. I don't disagree with them at all. But let's think about the priorities. Let's think about the content. Nobody's going to sit down and start worrying about their punctuation or their spelling. I can't even say the word fungus or fungi correctly, but I'll know how to spell it eventually if I write about it, right? But what do I want to say about it? What if I wanted to write about my experience of what I learned from that little bit of exposure? What's the concept I want to get across? What's the meaning? What's the intention? And then I'll go back and work on the correctness. That's how I think we as writers and imaginationers approach it. It's the opposite often on the reader side. And I'll say, if the content isn't there, nobody's going to want to bother to read it. But the first thing they'll notice if that it has not nearly enough correctness, they're going to start in reading and go, this person didn't even know how to spell it. This person didn't type, or this person didn't proofread, or this person's blah, 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 blah. So you have to take care of all of it. But as writers, I think we have to take care of the content first, and then take care of the correctness, because readers are going to get hung up and delayed and dismayed by the incorrectness. And they'll think wrong things about you. They'll think you're ignorant, or you don't care, or things you don't want to think about you. So I wanted to pull that in, because I think that also helps us understand rhetoric and composition. Because if you want to communicate something, and this is if it's oral or written, think about your purpose. What are you trying to communicate? Why am I writing this? And then, of course, we have the whole educational question of how do you get beyond the grade? But that's another thing. And now I haven't answered your question, Stone, but I felt, led to talk about one of the things that I always found most important. It's still fun important. I helped my husband get started writing when he had said, I have a book to write, I have a story to tell, but I don't know how to do it. And I said, and the last thing we thought about was the correctness. First of all, I said, start writing story. We'll get that other stuff figured out later.
That's it. Here's the thing, Marsha, you are an expert. Now, you and I joke around and say, oh gosh, I could be better and I'm behind and whatever. But you have gone through the process. You've got an earned doctorate. You worked with great Ross Kelly, all these great people in the field. You've taught thousands of students. We can document you as an expert. So when Marsha tells a single mother driving 3 hours a day round trip, to try that, which was me in 1999, that she can be a teacher, despite all my really self-doubt, you believe her. And while you were, and I know that your husband, who is now twice published, believes you as well. But you really got me to an idea. And if it sounds like this podcast is a hard sell for people to believe that everyone is a rhet comp and a writer and a creator, that's what it is. Because I was thinking about you, of all places, Marsha, at the minor league ball game the other night. And so everybody bear with me for a minute. We go to see the Myrtle Beach Pelicans single A, and we go see the Dunedin Blue Jays single A in Dunedin, Florida, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Dunedin, Florida. And I'm the mother of a son, and I love to watch these young men out there just giving everything they have. And I'm left-handed, and I'm a girl, and I had glasses when I was learning baseball. And I don't know, Marsha, I'm terrible. The few times I got up there, I got hit. I mean, I'm awful. But I watch these young men and they're out there and just giving it all they've got, and they make maybe $600 to just go out there and kill themselves, and they're having to provide their own shoes, and God knows what they ate for supper. Their mother's worried sick, because these are little boys in their 20s. And
Oh,
I watch them out there, and here we come for not a lot of money to sit and just for, because my husband likes the thrill of the game. I'm a tennis player, but I like the idea of the game. And I see these young men, and something really compelling happened. So the Fort Myers Muscles, boy, those boys were hot that night. They got a little bit ahead, and something really interesting happened. So the Dunedin Blue Jays realized, Marsha, pretty early on it wasn't going to be their night. And the boys who are playing played harder. They tried crazier things. They started trying to steal bases more when it was obvious they were already out. And I thought, wow, this is a boy who was born to play baseball, right?
uh-huh, uh-huh.
And so sometimes you see that with writers too. Like Ernest Hemingway's teachers probably are like, wow, I hope nobody puts this guy's flame out, right? But here's the thing about baseball. Marsha, if you and I decide we want to play for the Dunedin Blue Jays, I don't want to upset you, but we're not going to make it.
We're not gonna get on the team, are we?
We've missed the boat. And even if I buy nicer shoes than those little boys, God, me and shoes, and I'm worried about their little shoes. Some of them were so bad. Nike or somebody, if you're listening, ought to help out the single A ball players. But anyway, that's another podcast. I worry, but I realized at that point, I cannot go out and convey what I think about minor league ball. I cannot go out there and know that feeling. That's why I'm a spectator. But I could take every one of those little boys and spend 5 or 6 days with them and help them compose their ideas into an original piece of rhetoric, couldn't I?
You sure could.
No matter where they are,
Yes,
no matter how far they went in school, no matter what they know about commas. And I could probably
yes,
teach them to write about fungus if we had the internet to research, couldn't I?
yes, yes,
It kind of makes
yes,
you think that rhetoric and composition kind of belongs to everybody, no
yes.
matter what level of literacy or how well they write or how many but then, Marsha, here comes the thing. Then it kind of almost becomes everybody's responsibility to learn how to do it, if you look at it that way, maybe, right?
True. Yes, 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 Donna, it's part of what we have with us when we get here. And
Yes.
and it's how we create or don't create relationship with other human beings. You know,
That's kind of a
you,
key piece, isn't it? Because that baseball talent was all that boy needed to create that relationship with me. I sat there,
right.
I watched him, and we have this very established mechanism. I'm allowed to sit in certain seats, they're allowed to stand in certain places. There's very established rules, and nobody
Yes,
gets upset about them. Everybody is real well behaved. Nobody's saying, I want to sit on third base, I want my money back. But when we start doing writing and rhetoric and composition, we have a lot of that negotiation, don't we? Where people are like, well, I don't want to learn these commas, or, well, I just can't do it. And APA and MLA are too hard, or poems don't make sense.
yes.
People feel like they can kind of mediate with us a little bit more, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, yes. So, and you don't see me out there. Yeah, we're not out there going, excuse me, but I want to play ball. And so I don't want to be the third base woman. So, that just needs to happen. And nobody lets us say that. And I can't go into a classroom or I can't. Oh, there's other situations where writing or speaking or talking to someone. I can't go and just ignore other people.
And I can't go
I
out
mean,
there and say, y'all, I want my money back unless y'all give these little children some decent shoes. They're hurting their feet. They're going to say, get this nutter out of here. But
like,
here's
but
the
what
good
you could
news.
do, what could you do about those shoes?
There we
You
go.
could give us, yeah, baby, you can say, well, I'm gonna write a letter to the editor, or I'm gonna schedule a meeting with whoever's in charge of all that and how money is or isn't available, or you can use language, you can use words, and you have to think So, Stone, this is a great example of persuasion. You want to persuade somebody to help these young men have better shoes to play in. Okay. How are you going to do that? And you might do that orally, you might do it in writing, you might do both. How are you going to do that? Who are you going to talk to? What kind of language are you going to use? Are you going to be Ms. Huffy, Dr. Stone, and go in there and say, I've figured this out. This is what needs to happen. Are you going to be gentle? Are you going to talk to that person as a mother only, or as a, or as a baseball fan? Or, I mean, what is your approach going to be? What words are you going to use? What's your tone? All of those decisions we get to make, and we have to make if we want to get on in the world. We want to live.
And here's what I learned from Marsha Lee Baker that changed my life at Western Carolina University at about 8:30 at night one night, and I still had to drive home, and I still remember it. This idea that the minute you start saying, this bothers me, or I want to know more about this, or this is something in my life, I have a question, I want to learn more about this, you have started writing. You have started composing. You have started critical thought. And that is just what, I can never thank you enough for that. And boy, be careful being nice to me, because here she is still doing me favors. But
Stone, that's such a wonderful thing to hear you say.
But it's true, because
the brain is engaged, the heart is engaged at that point.
But that proves that everyone is a rhetor and everyone is a compositionist, because I really want to stress this point. Let's say that I want to go and say something about those shoes, and Jim talked me out of it, by the way, everybody. So we're good. I'm welcome back at the Cardinals, but or at the Blue Jays. Sorry, I'm welcome back at the Blue Jays because Jim talked me out of it. I'm not there yet, right, in my process. But writing is a process, and the minute you start saying, what can I do about this, the minute you ask that first question, you are engaging in rhetoric and composition. It's not some fancy thing for people who went to the right school. It's not some fancy thing for people who just know how to do it. It is what we all do every time we point at somebody to be like, hey, do you mind if I get in line in front of you? Really, that's rhetoric and composition, because we're communicating. Would you say that's true?
I sure would.
Yeah.
I absolutely think yes.
And so that really gets at your point that I think we can't stress enough today. And it's that idea of correctness. If you're doing it for yourself, to learn what you think about something, and you start writing down questions, who do I want to talk to? Who do I want to be when I want to go talk there? Who cares if you spell it right and it's full of mistakes? You're writing it down in a way where you can read, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yes. And it is process, and process is not something that's created by teachers who make students write. It is the nature of the critical creative process.
but Marsha, if I don't ever get any points for it at school, and this is my rub. So somebody says, here, turn this paper in by Friday, and they just get a grade on the final paper. How can it be that other stuff is important? Explain that one to me.
So the question again?
So I say, turn in, and students from 7th grade on have heard this. Turn this paper into me Friday, use 3 sources, here's MLA format, go. And then you're wanting them, with everything they have in their life, you're wanting them to not just sit down and write it and let spell check fixing it. You're trying to convince people to start with writing down their questions, going to the library, writing a draft. That's a lot of work, Marsha, and it doesn't say on the rubric that we have to do it. So why would I?
You're right. Well, and that's what students will say, right? Why would I do all that?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, first of all, change the rubric. I mean, that's sort of the tail end of this, is that, yeah, if you expect, if you know and expect that process will be meaningful when you get to the end of what you've written, the student has written, a student, let's give them a name, right? Okay, so so Joe wants to write this paper on, baseball. and he wants it to be good, and he's got this story about his old worn out shoes and the fly ball he caught. And so then you say, that's cool, that fits the the kind of what topics, things, ideas we might be writing about. And so then you say, but it's going to be important that you work this piece and you get me and somebody else to read it, and you get feedback and you strengthen it. And then you go back and make sure you get all that correct business taken care of. And if you want them to go through that process and you believe in it and you try to preach it to them, and, get a little, get a little buy-in from them, then you hold them accountable for it and put that in the grade, put that in, and it's a lot of work for anybody to look and see what did a writer do in the first and second draft and then the final version. And writing is a lot of work. All of it can also be very rewarding. And also this labor intensive stuff.
What happens,
Well,
Marsha?
one of the things that needs to happen, well, this stone is when we get into talking about changing the structure of education and changing classroom size and changing the amount of time that a seventh grade teacher has to talk with each of their students and think about how this piece of paper is, how this paper is developing, et cetera, et cetera. There's not the structurally in most of the education I know about, there's and have been a part of, there's not enough time.
Time is
And
the enemy, right?
yeah, somebody else puts that on us. Yeah.
So
There's plenty of motivation, for a while, that Joe wants people to enjoy his story, wants them to learn something from it, remember it. I want Joe to really knock that one out of the ballpark, so to speak. But I don't have enough time. And he's got that's what I think.
And so what happens? Because I think that, spoiler alert, teachers are overworked, students are overworked,
Yeah.
and at some point or the other, it's going to come to a head. And we'll just put all our nasty little secrets out there. Me and Marsha aren't really that private. And the reality of it is, everybody, and I do mean everybody, and I'm not a big essentialist, but everybody in general has learned this idea that STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, really matters. And the humanities are kind of the other stuff we do while we're waiting to see who's good at STEM.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
and you know what? I understand it. Does an engineer make more than an English teacher? Absolutely. Ask my brother-in-law what he makes and look at what Jim and I make, and you'll see why he hosts the summer party, right? So there if we look at financial composition and who gets what, and I think also if we look at the schema of the courses, so in a lot of the STEM or the science courses, they don't, there are some of those short answers. There's a lot of that production based stuff because kids have to memorize a lot of stuff in high school and college. But let's not forget that our production based stuff in English and the humanities happens when we're so little we don't even realize it. We sit down and sing A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Mm-hmm.
We learn our alphabet. We
Mm-hmm.
memorize reading red, blue, green, however we learn to read. So when we're little kids, we don't really realize that our classrooms kind of operate on a lot of memorization. An A doesn't mean an A in Turkish. The Turkish A looks nothing like ours. They have a whole different set of symbols, right? And it sounds differently. The way they say A in Spanish and French is maybe different than ours. A just means A in America because we've agreed that's what it's going to sound like. And the way Marsha and I say A is different from the way somebody in New Jersey does. So you do a lot of your memorization and your production based learning for our discipline, for English and rhetoric and composition, really early on. And there's this idea in a lot of societies, not just American, where once you can talk and understand and function, you're kind of good. Like you've memorized what you need to, and you could just go out and start talking. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's part of the problem, right? Because if somebody tells you, well, 1, 2, 3, go, and your teacher says 1, 2, 3, go, why wouldn't you? And that gets to a next big point. And this is a confession that I didn't make until I was in my master's program with Marsha and the late, great Dr. Hal Farwell, another
Yeah.
great professor at Western. And that was this idea that I wasn't real. I'm terrible at math, terrible at sciences, but I was really good at words, Marsha. From the time I was a little kid, I was reading early. I mean, really good at words. And boy, I liked them the way that little boy in the shoes like baseball. And so I started writing news stories very young and working in news. And I mean, you can tell me to write about something and I can get it done in a day. I'm just good at it. Now I can't play baseball and I can't do math, but I can do that. And it wasn't until I went to a great school, undergraduate, University of North Carolina, got a degree in journalism, which is pretty much a degree in writing. But it wasn't until I got to my master's program that this tough old bird named Marsha Lee made me write as a process. Now, I want you to hear me say that. I was 30
Yeah.
years old and had been a professional writer all my life before I ever was forced to write as a process. And y'all, let me tell you, she's slick. Here's how she did it. She made us turn in steps. So I go into her class and she's like, you got to turn in this paper in the class. And I'm like, oh, good. I'm really busy. I'll get that done the second weekend. It's only 18 pages. Perfect. And I took her this long draft and she's like, where's the other stuff? And I said, well, I kind of did that, but where's the other stuff? And y'all, I had to go back and do that other stuff. And it took me forever. And then the paper I had written didn't make any sense. And I saw kind of it wasn't really that great and how many places I'd missed and how many steps I'd skipped over. And at 30 years old, I realized that for 30 years, I had sold myself short on everything I had ever written because I just read the rubrics and listened to my system and just tried to get to the finish line as fast as I could. And Marsha, as Marsha may remember, it made me angry. And so I said, we've got to do better than this. And so here we are, y'all listening to it. But my point is, whether you're good at writing or you're not good at writing, we've given you examples of where you really have to look to learn that your time is worth it to spend time on the steps of writing the same way you spend time on the steps in algebra. Did I make that point, Marsha?
Wow. Yes, you did. And I'm so grateful for you telling it and allowing me to make you angry and for you to go for it. I think and I think you, Stone, had of course, of course you wanted to do well, blah, 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 all that whole thing. But what you did was to prove to yourself, oh, actually just because I can do something really good, really quickly, doesn't mean I ought not learn how to do something in a different way and see what happens. You were willing to take the learning demand from me, the opportunity, and now here you are knowing what the difference is. It's yes, 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 yes.
And thank Marsha of all the ideas that reached their potential over these last 20 plus years, because I saw process. And so if we go back to the baseball player, this one young man in particular who hit a home run and one home run, and the rest of the time just got decimated, right? Because he was just going for it. But that's what they put him out there for, right? Because he wanted that one home run. Who cares about the rest of them, right? But think about this. So they have this thing called a bullpen. Can you tell I'm coming late to the game? They have this thing called a bullpen, and the pitchers go over there and they warm up, and all the batters stand there and they got 2 or 3 bats in their hand, and they got all this stuff going on and weights on them and dumbbells, and they put this thing to protect their ankle so the pitcher doesn't hit them. It is a process, process, process to get up there and hit
Yes,
that
yes.
ball. I mean, and it's not like tennis. They just hit on one side. They don't have a forehand and a backhand. They get up there and they just have to hit right or left-handed. But Marsha, the process for them to go up there and stand maybe 2 or 3 times during the game is intense. Now imagine if that little boy had never had a process and they just said 3 times during the game, go up there and hit that thing. I mean, that one little boy who hit the home run every now and then would get one, but imagine how limited and crippled he would be if he had not been in an industry slash sport where someone had said, it's not about your time at the bat, it's about the process you get there. You know, my husband
Oh
Jim,
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
my
Oh yeah.
husband Jim, who is a big baseball fan, says that the best writing is about baseball. And he says that because the writing is about the process and the stories behind it. And so, you know, the way we invite our culture to want to hear the process behind the fungi or whatever it is, and the way that we want to learn about the process of this baseball player, we've got to maybe tell our citizens that that same process happens with your words.
Yes, 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 yes. Yes. And
You
it's
don't
gonna be
want to be
so
that ball player, right? Who just walks up and takes a
yes.
whack at it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, and then there's this other side of it. You know, I remember this one student I had at Western Carolina. It was about 99, 2000. And oh, she just hated coming to my class. Oh, she just hated it. We went outside and she hated it and she hated me and she just hated the whole thing. And I know that because she told me every time she came. And I would just say to her, I don't blame you, because I knew how she felt. I could just feel her and I knew she was struggling and I knew she could have been earning money instead of listening to me. And I really got it. And so one day she came in and threw her stuff down, and a little boy looked at me next to me and said, why are you in such a bad mood? And he was struggling. He'd come in about a D writer, and we'd gotten him up to a B, and he was helping me carry my stuff and coming early. We kind of had him in the fold. And she said, well, since you asked, and we're sitting outside at Western underneath this pretty little tree, and she said, since you asked, they just made a fool of me at the car dealership, and I am sick and tired of going there. And just because I'm short and just because I'm a girl, what do you think about that? And I said, I think you're pretty good at words, and that if we all sit down here with you and you tell us what was said, we could help you compose a way to go back in there and talk to him and have him do right about your car. And I want you to know that that girl got a B in my class and went on to take me again because she saw that connection. Her name's Tammy. She saw that connection, and yay for Tammy. Yay for Tammy. She owns her own company. But she saw that connection between what rhetoric was, and then it wasn't just writing a paper. To turn into English class. And I'm not going to lie, Marsha, I used to say, y'all, I have to make everything perfect because my boss, Dr. Marsha Lee Holmes, is really a stickler. So we have to follow the rules because she's watching me, y'all. So just so you know, I was the good cop and you were the bad cop. But it was a real situation where I put her, no matter how much angry she was, I accepted it. Mm-hmm. And I made it a situation where she needed a process to compose. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. She couldn't just she just didn't, write that up the night before and turn it into, but so it was real. And I think it's sometimes, and I understand it's hard for students to see writing is real when it's coming to them as an assignment from a classroom. And so you seized that moment to help her and everybody see that. And that's probably where all of us as teachers of writing need to think more about that. How can I, and how can we be more ensured that they see it as a real thing, not just another task, a chore, assignment. They're never going to, they go to baseball practice and practice hitting and catching and all that, but they're never really going to play the game. Nobody does that if they don't really want to play the game. So you got to get them in the game. I can't believe you got me on baseball metaphors.
I can't believe you and I mean, wow. Talk about nerve. And that's what I'm getting at. I just had to go to a couple of games to get a little agency. And that's one
Yeah.
word that I am not going to leave until you talk to me about what agency means.
Oh, Lord, have mercy. Well, well, I immediately want to go to Burke's Pen Tad. Can I have that? Can I have, may I do that?
Well, you're going to have to. Yes, of course you
Yeah.
may have it.
Well, I mean, that's how I first really learned about the significance, or even maybe the presence. I don't even know. It's so important in life. I mean, this was a rhetorical theory that you and I learned. But to have agency, you've got to have a means. If you're going to do something, if you want something, if you want to um, be well respected at the car dealership, or if you want to get a job, or you want to get the shoes for the boys, you have to have a means to it. You have to have an agency. And you can't just be the person, the agent who does this. You have to have a means, a way through to it. Um, oh God. So Stone and I learned to think about everything. I mean, okay, there's this real famous hard read rhetorician, Kenneth Burke, who sooner or later,
Burke,
yeah.
Kenneth Burke.
And in his theorizing about how we use language and how we communicate and all that, I mean, like he's still read, he's passed, still like everybody who wants to go into this studies him and all this. But anyway, so but he puts this, like if you're it's a pentad, which is a 5-pointed thing, and it kind of looks like a house. Or you can draw it as a star with 5 points if you want to. But Burke's theory was that in everything, anytime we're using language, we've got to have an agent, somebody who's going to do it. Agent. We've got to have an agency, a means to do it. We've got to have a scene. Where's that going to be? Like choosing whether it's going to be in a speech or at the mayor's office or whatever. Agency, scene, act. What is it you're going to actually do? What's that piece of text or that speech going to look like? And purpose. Why in the world are you doing that? And so off of what it feels, oh gosh, Stone, you're so good at talking about this. We often feel as we don't have an agency. We don't have a means for doing it, but that's what we search for as agents. How am I going to be able to do this? And why am I going to do this? I don't really talk about agency or any of those 5 parts of communication or language or speaking or rhetoric or composition individually. I always have to think of them in terms of pairs or as the whole group. If I'm going to write well, Stone, if you were going to write that paper that I had assigned, and you're going to write it for me because it's an assignment, that was kind of a crummy me. So you kind of took the shortest, easiest, successful route to it, right?
Yes.
And so if that didn't fit for the scene, that did not fit for, and didn't fit for our purpose. And so you produced an act that was, as I tried to help you see and evaluated it, unsatisfactory. So you should go about a different means for creating that piece of writing. Now, I really think we should also then go to something that's not a, well, this was terrible. Okay, I was going to think, let's go to a more real world example. Oftentimes in my undergraduate classes, when I introduced the idea of Burke's pentad, I was okay, let's just think about this. Let's think about this for a minute. Say we find on Western Carolina's campus, out there at the clock tower, everybody gets up one morning and we find a dead body at the base of the clock tower? What are some questions you would ask? Oh my God, who did it? Why'd they do it? Why, what about where do they, where do they do this? How did they do it? All of that. And pretty soon you've got a pinch head. You would ask all those questions. That's how our human curiosity and brains would work. So who did it? Why did they do it? How did they do it? Anyway, so you can analyze any situation and any piece of writing and anything you ever want to do in life by asking those questions: the who, what, when, where, and why. And why, the purpose. Well, that isn't why did this person kill another person? So I've used it.
But Marsha, who gives
What?
me the agency? Like, who am I? I'm not a detective. Who am I to talk? Like you said, what are we doing about baseball? But why do I have the right to worry about those little boys' shoes? Who am I? Like, who decides who gets agency?
Oh, that's a gem of a question, because it's who gets to this. Oh, sugar. It's because,
I mean, if a teacher gives me a C on a piece of writing, does that mean I don't have the agency to be a writer?
no. And see, I'm thinking now all across all sorts of relationships, and I need to come back to the classroom.
No, you don't.
Well, y'all, I mean, I think in an educational setting, and I may be totally wrong and not want to agree with myself, and not agree with myself later, but a teacher and a student have to agree on it.
Okay.
The student, they have to agree on. I think the student has to give themselves agency, even when they think only the teacher has it.
Oh, tell me about that.
Well, it's like in that example of when you realize, oh, for heaven's sakes, I have to go through all this process crap for my professor. Well, I can crank out a good, I can do this act. I can create this. I've got the means and the experience and everything to do this. But I wouldn't accept that because it's not all I was wanting you to learn. But so you had to finally, you took it up for not the reason of learning. You took it up to get through the course and tolerate me and make the grade.
Right.
But it was but you decided to think about it and realize what you had done. What you had done was go along with me, but you also had then looked at what you produced. You had the agency to produce that act because you were willing to take it.
Because I got angry and I said, wait a minute, I can do better.
That's right. That's right. And it's not always the best way for it to happen. But see, anger is one of your motivating emotions.
Which is sometimes good and sometimes bad. But if I'm hearing you, that agency cannot be given by the teacher the way the teacher gives a grade. The agency to say that I can talk about this and I will has to come from the student. And I want to make this point. We can do an average job and turn in a thing and probably get by in life.
That's right.
It's that moment when we say, I think I'm going to go for it and say what I really think.
Exactly.
Is that more of what agency is?
Yes, it is. And yes, it is. And I know for me in much of my education, I wouldn't, the way I took on agency was not, you took on anger. I took on, I would be passive. Or I would be, I don't know, I would be a good girl. I did so much in my life because I wanted to be a good girl. And so I want to be a good student. And so I was okay, I will be a good student. I will do this paper the way my teacher tells me, you see. But I was muffling myself. And then I got to the point by graduate school, thank goodness, where I said, oh, hell no, I'm not going to write that paper if you have only one interpretation of this short story and I'm going to write about it and completely disagree with you. I'm not wasting my time. Or, yeah, I'll take that on. We'll see what you say about it. That was me taking ownership of what I would say. And ultimately, we cannot, certainly in pedagogical situations, we cannot force that. We can punish with a grade or reward with a grade, but no. Yeah. It's like I've never had a child, never raised a child. But Stone, you can make that comparison. What's it like? You can't. Ultimately, you can force, but you cannot give agency, but you can force someone to do something they don't want to do. And, in ugly situations.
So what do we do? I have to tell you, for me, anybody who's ever written, I didn't take math personally. As a matter of fact, poor Kathy Hanel, if she hears this podcast, my 6th grade algebra teacher, God love her, or 7th grade, maybe Dulciana algebra, she tried. But I would say to her all the time, if you already know the answer, why do I have to find it? And to be honest with you, unless I'm doing
Yes.
my
Yeah.
checkbook, I still kind of feel that way about some of that stuff, because it wasn't my deal, right? Like, I wasn't hoping to learn the foundations of math so that I could come up with a new way to do Dulciana algebra, if they even teach that anymore. So that was my attitude, and I'm wondering what would have happened if I had had a teacher who had respected that and said, I get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because but I did have a lot of writing teachers, maybe, that I have worked with over the last 20 years. And so I teach a lot of non-majors. I teach mostly non-majors. I work with some
Yeah.
graduate students, and I can't even say beyond words how proud I am of what these people are doing in their lives, working and going to school and having careers and going to graduate school. But most of my undergraduate life is with people who are non-majors. And by that, I mean they are not majoring in English. And so they are coming by me to do what our culture requires, is that they're majoring in business or something STEM, right? And
Yes.
they're required to take some general education or some humanities if they haven't already tested out of in high school, and maybe they're in high school taking the college or whatever. And so I say to them up front, I know that you're not an English major. I know that you may not love this, but what I want you to do is to be able to be out into the world and talk about this literature, or talk about writing, or talk about philosophy, because those are the 3 subjects I teach, in a way that you feel like you can read something and form your own opinion. And
Yes.
the truth is, I get a bunch of kids who turn in the paper the way I tried to turn it into you. I get some people who go out and try to sound real smart. And then I get those people that I'm looking for who struggle and start off writing very basic ideas, and by the end can argue with me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think, Marsha, 20 something years later, what I'm finding is some of them got the agency and some of them did not. And I think this idea, I'm never going to like math. Greater people than us have tried. And so, is it okay to accept that some people don't want that agency? Do you think that's okay? Or should we just never give up? Do
Uh,
you?
we should never give up on encouraging it, finding ways to offer opportunities, but we have to ultimately accept it. We can't, or else we're trying to, or else we start violating the other person's humanity. And you
What?
know me long and well enough that that is not what I'm about.
And so, let's imagine, I do know you long and well enough to know, and which is why I'm still here learning at the feet of the master or the mistress. But I do know that. And I think maybe that is what's at the hope and the heart of the humanities, that we will stand here every day with our writing centers and our resources ready for the day when people find their agency.
Yes. Yes, 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 yes.
Well, to that end, I think we've set a nice foundation for any future conversations we have. And now that we are going to assume into evidence that we have some agency in the choices that we make, I want to get back to something that drew me to you in the first place, and that you really just comes out of you in this conversation. And that's this idea that we can, it may sound crazy on your first pass through it, everybody, so stay with us. This idea that we can choose to make things more peaceful. I mean, how are you going to look at the world with war and all this stuff going on and choose to pick peace? Now tell me how we do. Tell me the tools for that, please.
Oh, Stone, you know I got that figured out. No, no, everybody goes into, well, everybody understands rhetoric and composition. They understand what we do with words. They understand what we can and cannot do with words. And then we just use them peacefully. That's it in a nutshell. Not really, but oh, what are our tools? That's what I think, what are our tools? What are our means? What do we have available to us? How do we get here? How do we want to go out? Think about things like that.
So, what is a tangible modern day example? And I want to get at bullying a little bit because I think bullying's a great way.
Mm,
Let's
mm,
talk through some scenarios. So I say to Marsha, well, you're just too demanding. And
mm.
you have some choices. If I say to you, I don't know if I want to talk to you about this anymore because you're just too demanding. And so when I do that, I've done a lot of things. I've told you that I'm thinking about backing out. So I've made you a little insecure that maybe, oh gosh, she's going to take away from me. So that can make you panic a little bit. And then I've cut you down. And then I've blamed all my problems on you. I mean, it would be kind of logical for you to turn around and say, well, you're just too lazy, or you're just too. I mean, to be honest with you, if I say, Marsha, I just don't, you're just too demanding. I don't want to keep doing this. It would be
Mhm.
almost rational for you to come back and say, well, you're too this because I opened the door for you to do it. What's to stop you from giving back what I gave?
What stops me now, or what I think, if we would learn to listen to what the person is saying, listen to what you're saying, I'm too demanding, and then say, and then try to, I listen and I try to understand instead of fighting back, throwing the snowball back, another snowball at you like you did to me or whatever. I said, well, tell me more about that. Or I don't understand. Help me understand how I'm demanding. Or I listen and I ask questions. I say, well, then how could I help you in a different way? How could I be less demanding? Or what do you want? Or going back to what you were talking about, getting us to a minute ago, how do I well, tell me what you do want. Tell me what's important to you in this course, or what matters for you about this paper, or let's talk about what your wants and needs are for a minute. And you don't have to do it in such a I mean, if as I've tried to learn how to not fuss back, not fight back, I mean, I've developed my own pause buttons, and another person might develop theirs, and it might be different. But you're kind of bullying me, or you're trying to bully me when you say that to me. And so I don't like feeling bullied. So I don't want to do that back to somebody. Um,
So the
So
first tool I'm hearing you say is that if somebody comes to you with name calling or bullying or demanding something that doesn't seem fair, one of the first tools we can really look at, the tools of rhetoric and composition. And again, these are at once fancy tools and basic tools. These are tools that we've had for 2,000 years and that we make new every time we use them. And so I think for this part of the conversation, I really want to get at some very tangible things when we're living our lives and we're in our day to day, and somebody comes at us with something that is maybe combative, confrontational, or violent or aggressive. What are some real things, basic, let's now we're into the lesson portion of the conversation. The first tool I'm hearing you say, if somebody says, well, I'm not doing this because you're this or you're that, or what they call back in my day, name calling. I'm going to change the dynamic and call you this. And of course the natural reaction, I think, is to turn around and say, well, then you're that. But you're saying if we're doing this agency thing where we have the agency to choose how we react, we don't just have to react. That agency thing is starting to give us some choices. So if I don't just react, like I don't just say, okay, here's your paper, I'll see you next week. But if I actually do the process of thinking and controlling my own language, then I've got some choices and I've got some agency. And the first tool I'm hear you saying is, if somebody comes at you with something declarative and not so nice or name calling, the first thing you want to do is ask them a question. Let's try it. Okay.
Okay.
So I'm gonna say, Marsha, I don't want to sit with you at the ball game. You just don't really understand the importance of the bullpen, and you're not really paying attention. Is that bullying, or is that just me looking for a reason not to sit with you? I don't know, but what would you do under your tool of questions?
Hmm. Well, if I really wanted to sit with you at the ball game, which I no doubt would, I could say, in order to keep from immediately just going to sit somewhere else and, being sorry, I might say, oh gosh, well, would it help if I tried to talk less and pay attention? And then we could still sit together?
Oh, so there's different types of questions. So
Yeah.
let's talk about this question. So you want to ask questions, but the questions, what kind of questions should they be? The question should get at the person's needs. The questions about the other person's needs. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I gave you an example that was about my needs, but no, the first thing I was saying was, no, I did first suggest that what I would do is to ask you a question. So let me think. If you said that, and I would say, well, to you, I mean, if I were going to ask a question, I'd say, oh, gosh, I'm sorry. I really want to sit. I wanted us to sit together. Do you think we could get together after the game?
Okay, so you gave two good options. One, you just accepted it. I'm not going to fight with you. Maybe I can see you later. And the other one was, well, what could I do to change the situation where you would want to sit by me? Those
Yes.
are two very different types of questions, but both of those questions kind of put me in a situation where you really put me in control, didn't you? You put me in control instead of digging deeper or doubling down, as we hear. He doubled down and was even meaner
Mhm.
back. That's something we hear a lot of. Instead of escalating it or turning it into a fight, you said, oh, okay, well, how do we solve your problem? So what
Mhm.
I'm hearing you say is that we want to ask questions that get at the problem. Is that a good way to talk about it?
Yes, that are responding to the problem that was raised. And so I mean, what's going to also happen in me is that I'm going to feel emotional. I'm going to feel hurt. I'm going to feel sad. I might even feel angry. I'm like, I cannot believe Stone said this to me. Why hadn't she said something to me before? Or I could think, Well, hellfire, I can remember all kinds of times when you've, not understood something. I could have had a lot of quick emotional reaction. Um, and over time, I've taught myself that's not a very helpful response. That's not a helpful way to go. That's not going to do anything to make up for the fact that my feelings just got hurt, that my friend has said she doesn't want to be with me. So I have to process. And I've had, I learned how to do that over time. Well, okay, all right. But right now, the situation we're in is moving forward, you know. And then I might think, well, I'll ask Stone about that later, but it's not a good moment, you know.
So we want
I,
to ask questions, but before we do that seems like an important tool. We want to say, is now a good time to even dig deeper? So we're making a lot of choices. The first thing is we kind of want to say, do we even respond back? I mean, is that an option? Somebody can say something ugly to us and we just don't even answer
well, we could choose that, but then we got to decide. I mean, if we're at the ball game and we're deciding we're going to the bleachers, and you say that to me, then each of us is going to walk a different way, or am I just going to stand there and you walk away from me? I mean, we've got to deal with the tangible time and place logistics of it. So
it's going to
tell
be
me,
different every day. I can't just learn some rules and say I'm going to do this every time. I
yeah.
think what I'm hearing you say is you've got to get back to listening to the situation. And something else that you brought up to me is really important, I think. I can remember when I was, say, pretty young, say 5, 6, 7 years old, and one of my lifelong friends, Becky, and I would get upset with each other. And when we were little kids, we'd just kind of fight it out pretty quick and get over it. And then the older we got, it seemed like the longer it took for us to work stuff out. And now that we're grown and our kids are grown, we rarely have those kind of situations ever. And it really gets at something you were saying. We have so much experience together, and she knows me so well that it takes a lot for us to really get in a confrontation. And of course, we never bully each other because we care about each other. You and I aren't going to bully each other because we care about each other. But let's let's imagine that we're in a different situation.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm
Let's
with you.
imagine that you and I are at the grocery store and I'm in a hurry and we've got a big old cart full of stuff because we know our boys like to eat. And some woman with a big old cart full of stuff pushes in front of us in line and bumps us, because I don't like to be touched, and bumps us and cuts in front of line and looks at us and says, move. Now, that's a pretty big bully. And so for me to say to her, ma'am, I'm so sorry. Why did you do that to me? I'm in a hurry and I was in line in front of you. Is that the time to ask questions? Because remember, in the situations with our friends, when they say something, that's where we feel pretty good to say, why did you say that? What can I do? To ask those questions. I'm sorry, I can't believe you said that. Maybe you hurt my feelings a little bit. What can we do? Or maybe we can see, somebody, you're in a much better situation in relationships with our friends or people that are in our lives, that you've taught us when there's something that feels like a bullying, you just want to ask a question. Well, what can we do to make it different? And that's a real path. But what about it when it's this rude woman who is pushed in front of us? I'm already in a hurry. She's cut me off and she's been nasty. I mean, is it really a good idea to ask her a question? Because boy, I can get off to the races pretty quick if somebody's nasty back to me. What do we do there, Marsha?
Oh, that's a good one. Because yeah, I'm thinking in the two example, like in this example, well, all of a sudden I have possibility of violence beyond, oh my gosh, you've hurt my feelings or you're being mean to me.
Right.
This is like, okay, oh my God, if I don't move, is this woman going to just, knock me out of the line? Or, or I mean, I'm not understanding this kind of behavior to begin with. And so then I'm wondering, why is this happening? And so then beyond that, I got to quickly decide what to do.
Right. And
Yeah.
sometimes
So,
words get us into trouble. We're sitting there saying, "Oh, use your words and get out there and write and compose, and you have the agency to
mhm,
always use your words." But sometimes, particularly, and I love how you call that out. If you and I are sitting here, two long-term friends, and I say something for whatever reason that you perceive as bullying, and you say to me, okay, well, maybe I could talk less. And then you take that extra step and say, well, gosh, son, I remember times where you talk too much too, and you kind of hurt my feelings. Then we've got that dialogue going where we're going back and
mhm,
forth. And I can say, oh, gosh, Marsha, I'm sorry. I'm just nervous about being at the
mhm.
game. I get upset every time I see their shoes. And then we're off to a real conversation, right? But
Yes,
I don't
yes,
know
yes,
this
yes.
woman, and we don't know what her intent is. And she obviously is not that concerned about my emotions. She just wants to get out of the grocery store
Yeah,
and is
yeah.
pretty aggressive in doing so. Is there ever a time, because of the emotions, because of the things we don't know about our audience, is there ever a time when it's strong to not use your words? What would you do as a person?
Uh, uh, Try not to immediately react because that's going to be probably an overreaction. Um, Try to, observe and give myself 2 seconds to catch my breath. And then I might even, this is when I might ask a question. I might go, I mean, I probably would, some comment of surprise, like, oh, and look around and say, oh, did I cut in front of you? Oh, did, are you okay? Look, see if there's a child in the, see what her circumstances are. Oh, are you sick? Do you need anything? I mean, I'm not gonna immediately be, Florence Nightingale, the nurse who saved everybody. But I'm going to see if there appears to be immediately a reason for this woman trying to bully me out of line in the grocery store. And so I'm not thinking, okay, what's my agency here? But I guess that's a way to think about it. What what can I do, and what can be my acts right now? How can I be a real human being standing here in this position when there's other human beings trying to push me out of the way? So I don't want to overreact or misjudge the situation. So I look and see if I can recognize what for me would be a rational reason for some stranger to tell me to do that.
And again, and she's done it with no words, right? I mean, she's just
Yeah,
pushed in, and so
but
that's important to remember, that rhetoric is words and actions, because she communicated with you. I'm in front of you, honey, and I have stared you
yeah,
down. What are you going
yeah,
to do about it? And I think over and over again, from the playground as children to adult women, we're in this situation where somebody says, I've done this, and what are you going to do about it? And
mm-hmm,
it is just really hard to know, which is, to be honest, the main reason I wanted to speak with you today, because I think you have some real actionable items here that we can all strive to get. And if it seems like I'm repeating the tools after every example, it's because I am, because they take time to learn and process. I've been learning them from you for 20 years, and I'm still working on them. But what we see, everybody, is that immediately she did go back to the questions. And I think that's one thing we want to underscore with rhetoric and composition, is that the answer always begins with that questioning strategy. And so whether you choose to say it out loud, or you choose to say to yourself, okay, don't want to overreact. I don't want to be the person screaming like a lunatic at the grocery store because of what happened to me. I have the agency to do better because I know better, but I'm going to either ask these questions to myself or out loud. Why did she do this? What would make her happen? Is she really angry enough where if I speak to her, she might blow her cool? Or would it do some good for me to speak to her and say, is everything okay? So you're saying that no matter what happens, whether it's two friends at the ball game or a combative situation where really you've been a little attacked at the grocery store, the first thing you should do is ask a question. And it sounds like those questions are necessary, whether you say them out loud or to yourself. Would that be a fair assessment of what you shared?
Yes, 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 yes. Because I might get I ask if I am asking to myself, I might get I might get answers that then suggest to me, okay, I know what the next what's the next thing I'm gonna do or say or not do or not say, you know. And if I see that woman in the grocery store and um I look, I observe, I might, are you okay? Um, I have taught, well, all of this is stuff that we teach ourselves. It's not, I mean, there are some people who we think of as angels on earth and they just automatically know, seems like know how to respond this way. But for me, it's been a learned thing. I mean, it used to be the good girl with everybody walking over me sort of thing, or but not anymore. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Okay, so forget that part. I mean, put that part away for a second. But it's yes, I ask the questions, and then because I have cared so much about creating peaceable situations, nonviolent language, um, to not be hurtful with our words. I may look at the situation and go, it's not worth trouble. It's not worth violence. It's not worth a row. Even if I don't see any reason I would have to move away from this woman, or I don't understand why she's doing this way. Unless I'm going to do it. I'm going to say, fine, you're welcome to go in front of me. I'm
But
not this.
again, you only get there from asking yourself questions. Even though you didn't say them
Yes,
out loud, you
exactly.
you had to ask yourself questions. And I want to get at that good girl idea too. We're both little bitty girls from the South, and that was certainly the message I got my entire life, is that I was to be seen and not heard. Um, and I kind of approached it a little bit differently. I went, where Marsha wanted to be a good girl, I wanted to get in and out quickly. If you're going to try to dismiss me, I'm going to come in as hard as I can, because I want to get in and out, and I don't like this feeling, and so I'm going to combat it. And I think you see a lot of that, right? Where I don't feel like I'm going to be seen or heard, so I'm going to try to not make any waves. Or I don't feel like I'm going to be seen or heard, so I'm going to try to get in and out as quickly as I can to avoid the situation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and all of those things are just kind of icky places that nobody belongs, right? Um, because on the other side of the coin, something happened somewhere in this woman's day that made her think it was okay to do that to another person.
Yes.
and
Yes.
and we don't know what it is. And I think it's really important to stress, Marsha, that it's not for us to know. We're not her mother, we're not
That's
her
right.
principal, we don't always have to know. And the real
Mm-hmm.
finesse and what you learn over time is getting better at anticipating when you say, is there something I can do to help you, or to just ignore it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. 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 Yes.
And so, what are some strategies? We ask ourselves some questions, but let's imagine that I'm 10 years old and I'm standing in line, and I feel like somebody, an adult, has come in and pushed me out of line or taken advantage of me and not seen me. What are some things I could do in my head to help me choose my next steps?
I'll give you an example that has come up to me in our prior discussions, talking about how people treat each other and bullying and things like that. And I don't know if this is exactly fits here, but I'll tell you an example of, and this might even make me cry. I just realized, because it's so touching to me. When I was in sixth grade, and there was one girl in the, and I was in chorus, and there was one girl in the chorus class whom everybody, it seemed like, made fun of. She was not, she seemed, She's not particularly pretty. Her clothes showed that. Her sort of maybe a poverty level. She was not kind of at the same, I guess it was a social economic class. And she didn't know how to hang out with the other sixth graders. She was just treated like an oddball. Well, I befriended her. She also wasn't real good in class. And so, because I had befriended her, she could come to me when everybody else was bullying her. And she came to me one day and said, everybody's making fun of my outfit, but I thought I did a good job because my top and my skirt are both blue. They're the same color. I thought it was a good outfit.
Oh,
It was all blue. And the top was some pattern, of flowers or something. And the skirt was another pattern. It might have been flowers or checks or something. But it was certainly not what it wasn't how I was taught to put a top and bottom together, and I figure that's why they were bullying her. And so I just said to her, I just was so heartbroken. It's a wonder I didn't go over and try to fight the bullies. But I said, it is pretty. The blues it's all blue and it's so pretty that way. And good color and blah, blah, blah. And then I said, I don't know. Maybe they were thinking because it's two different patterns. Maybe they decided to make fun of it. I don't know. But it's really pretty. And I just try to console her. I mean, I can imagine me at another point in life
yes.
making fun of her,
Yes.
So,
And
so,
that Marsha, to hear your voice when you are remembering that. I mean, doesn't that get at some of the potential for peace? Who listening cannot remember being the friend who told her the outfit was pretty, or
yeah,
being the friend in the blue outfit?
exactly.
I mean, I have
Yes.
shared so much in life with you, but that what you just shared with us, I think gets at the essence so much more than citing rules or citing scholars. For to hear in your voice what that felt like to witness one being bullied. I mean,
Yes.
let's hear the pain in your voice of witnessing one being bullied. Because at least that little girl had you. You had no one to go to say, listen to this pain and anguish that I felt over this little girl being bullied. And yet it changed you for your entire life, right?
Sure. Yes. Who do I want to be? What kind of person would how would I want to act? How would I want to be treated? Make
And I think,
choices on that with that in mind.
and that gets at really the whole message of your whole life and the whole essence of what we're talking about. It's really as simple as how would I want to be treated, isn't it?
Yes.
But I think you got at some key points. And, everybody says, oh, bullying is a terrible problem in our society. And it is a terrible problem in our society. But the problem is, Marsha, it's been a terrible problem in every society, which is why we can trace war back to every society. But if y'all study with Marsha or read any of her work, or listen to any of her presentations or anything that you do with her, the one thing you're going to learn is that everything else that to everybody made so hard, she's going to make it pretty simple. She's going to spend her life boiling it down, but she's going to do it. And what we're really learning from you, and every example I can think of and possibly try to throw out of left field to you, is that it's really pretty small toolbox when you're confronted with bullying. And that is to first ask questions and take a minute to feel your emotions before you react.
Yes, yes, yes. And
And for,
that's I don't claim that to be easy for any of us, but it's certainly learnable, and you can certainly work that within your. You can make that a part of you.
and I think that gets at the essence of what rhetoric and composition are. They are a part of us. The minute you point to your mother and hold your arms up to be picked up, you are a rhetor and a compositionist. You have thought of an idea and composed it to get someone to pick you up. And you did it
Yes.
without words because you don't have words, but lifting your arms and looking into your mother's eyes are the language you had to communicate. I want you to pick me up. We all have the agency to communicate, and we all do it. You have to, or you would not survive 24 hours. So, with that said, hearing the power of memory in your life to say that one moment, we're all changed by the girl in the stripes and the checks or whatever, the blue outfit. We're
Yeah.
all changed by that because we heard that authenticity where, y'all, she didn't write that and compose it and say, oh, I'm going to appeal to their ethos, logos, and pathos and who they are as a people and who they voted for. Didn't have anything to do with that. Something happened in your life and you felt at a loss for rhetoric to compose to help this person. And so you paused for a minute and tried to give her everything you could to comfort her. On a contrary situation, we're in line with this woman at the grocery store. You're in a hurry. She's made you mad. She's robbed you of your rights. Who does she think she is? All those emotions that we all feel are normal, but there's
Yeah.
no stopwatch on us where we have to jump out and give as good as we got. And I
Yeah.
love that idea of saying we all get mad, we all get hurt. It's all bad. The bully's done something that's not great for their spirit, and we've received something that's not great for ours. But we have that same agency. We have to hold our arms up for somebody to pick us up. We have that same agency, don't we, Marsha, to slow the situation down and to make choices. And that's kind of
Yes.
what I want to wrap up today with. How can we use our choices to change an ending to a story we didn't begin?
Oh, wow. What a great question. Yeah. Oh,
Tell us about that work and tell us about some of your ideas on how we change an ending to something we didn't begin, because this to me is really where your future lies, and I hope we'll all get to follow it.
so you're posing the question or the thought, how do we how do we end up making choices? Say it again. You said it so beautifully.
Oh my
How a
gosh.
choice changing agency. How do we as
Yes, how do we get
we
to a
make
point?
choices? But
We make
go ahead.
choices where we get a different ending. So we talked about some choices where, I mean, where you and I are probably going to be able to sit at the ball game together because
Yeah.
you make those choices to ask me questions and give me a space to get beyond my bullying. We're going to get to check out at the grocery store maybe 5 minutes later, but we're not going to have to open up a can of whoop ass on this woman because we're going to
Yeah.
make choices. And maybe that day the choice is to say, would you like to go ahead? Are you okay? Or, don't worry about it. Or maybe we just look at her and don't say a word and hope it goes away. So we've talked about, but how do we begin and spend the rest of our lives now that we understand that we're all rhetors, we're all compositionists? How do we go about making this life where we choose a different ending? We don't have to go along with the bully. I know it'll make them mad. maybe at the outset, and it takes a lot of courage. But how do we go about when we're in a situation that's going south, or a situation that's going towards violence or negativity? How do we start right now, no matter our age or our situation, to make a different ending? If somebody comes at us with negative, what are some tools, as now that we're all rhetoricians and compositionists together, what are some steps we can take to make that end, to turn that ending around? As my friend Cricket says, to turn that frown upside down. It's kind of a goofy way to think about it, but now that we know that we have the ability, in the tradition of Kenneth Burke, to ask some questions, and that we have the agency to ask those questions, and that we have the ability to make choices and to listen. How do we do that? How do we turn bullying around on our own?
Especially and it's when I am being when it's, well, you could even turn it around, whether who's the bully, you or me. You can look at it that way. But I think we realize that we can help still develop ourselves, create ourselves, be ourselves. And so I don't have to be afraid, that you or the woman in the grocery store don't recognize me as a human being. I am an agent. I'm a human being. I'm here. Okay. And I can then choose to, if I want to think about, then if I want to choose to defend my humanity, then I make choices for my agency. And my humanity says, I'm not going to let my good friend put me down, or I'm not going to let this other woman bully me until I can figure out what the situation is. And so we first of all, I can't believe I'm saying this. First of all, we learn to love ourselves. First of all, I have to stop being the good girl all the time, right? First girl. So, that takes a lot of time for some of us. So we respect ourselves. Mm-hmm. Then we make choices. If I'm going to be respectful to other human beings, I have to think about the means to my ends. I have to think about my means to the end. What's important here? Is it really important that I get out of the grocery store before this woman? Is it really important that I treat this other human being like a human being? And maybe it's really important that, by golly, I get in that grocery store line and stay in front of her, and that's the way it's going to be. Maybe I have some other circumstance in life, and maybe I have to try to let her know that. But I have to learn, first of all, about me as an agent.
Okay.
And what do I think my purpose is? Like we said toward the beginning, why am I here? Well, I'm going to try to make this world a better place. Now some people decide, and I'm going to do that by being, rich and famous and this way or that way, or but you got to get kind of centered in yourself. And I think that's what educators on the whole in their heart are trying to help students do. And then we realize we have options, so I can choose to respond in all these different ways. And then I think about the end. What do I really want to happen? Do I want this woman and me at the grocery store to get in a fuss? Do I want the store manager to have to come, tell me something I didn't want to know or didn't hear? What do I want to really happen? So I think about that. Then I choose a means for that end.
I'm loving this idea of options. I'm loving this idea of first we respect ourselves. And I really like that you're honest. Love yourself. You're great. You're wonderful. And agreed we are. But I love that you said how much time that takes, because it's really important to remember that this is not math. We cannot say Marsha plus Stone telling you agency equals no more bullying.
Right.
There is not that equation, right? And so I'm hearing you say that it's really important to remember that even though that woman's situation wasn't about you, and even though them picking on this little girl's outfit really wasn't about her, no matter what it's about, you have to start with yourself, no matter what the situation, and say, who do I want to be? How do I respect myself, no matter what I'm hearing around me? Marsha, that's so hard. Maybe you hear, I'm not bright, or I'm too bright, or I'm not tall, or I'm too tall, or I'm not thin, or I'm too thin, or all these
Mm-hmm.
kinds of things you hear. And so we kind of are getting back, Marsha, if I'm hearing you correctly, we kind of are getting back to respect ourselves. We have to do this idea of, why am I here and what do I want to be doing? And that's kind of maybe how we can find a way to respect ourselves, by figuring out what we want out of our time here. That's how we can respect ourselves. Is that what you're saying?
Sounds like it, doesn't it?
It really, really does. And so, to go back to the first part of the conversation, you knew very early on that you did not want war, and you did not want people killing each other. And for example, the Vietnam War, the Gulf
Mm-hmm.
Wars,
Mm-hmm.
the situation currently today in Ukraine, were literally thinking killing other people is bad, and that starts with language. And so that really shaped who you are. And so, as a very early turn in life, as we see from your friend in the blue outfit, you have decided that part of being yourself means that you cannot tolerate violence and bullying. And a lot of people might hear that and think that you became a kickboxer or a cage fighter, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
what do you do when somebody's bullying? Well, you can walk softly and carry a big stick. You can build a bigger army and tear the other person down. We hear so much of that, and yet I've yet to hear any violence as your answer. Your answer has all been, figure out what I want from myself, and then try to help the other person do the same thing by asking them questions. Is that true?
Yes, yes, because, and this is in uh, even personal experience, violence begets violence. I've never lived or read about an experience where that is not true. Somehow other violence begets violence. If I hit you or you hit me, if something, you return it with violence, and then generally it escalates. Um, yeah, yeah. I, and so words and thinking, reading, writing, using language, that's what we've got. Human beings come down with language. Um, how can we use that to nurture each other, and this is why I am such the believer in collaboration and coordination, and oh God, I know all educators and all of y'all have been in the classroom. you know I'm not always the favorite teacher right off the bat, or maybe ever. Oh my God, she wants us to collaborate. Oh, shoot, we got to be in a group. It's like, just let me get my little own individual business done and I'm out of here. Oh, but the world doesn't work that way. Work, family, national relationships, nothing, it doesn't work that way. So we may as well start practicing now.
Wow. Okay. So you can imagine that I was the person in her class who did not want to do the group project. And by the way, I'm still friends with Marat and Liz. So the collaboration really worked out for me. But yes, and I think that what we've talked about, the earlier story where I said I turned in this paper and said, here's your paper. And she said, no, honey, the point of the paper was the process, not the completed project. So we got in a little tiff, and she made me angry, and I was going to show her, and it changed my life forever, right? And so, to get back at that idea, and we think about the lady in the grocery store, and she set up a situation where we are enemies. You have a place in the line, and I'm going to go take it. And what are you going to do to stop me? And so
Mm-hmm.
at that point, we're combatants, we're enemies, we are on opposite sides. But what collaboration teaches is, Now I can go back and I mean, as little bitty as I am, I have long arms and I can reach up and punch her in the face if I want to. And I can give back just as good as I gave. And in that situation, Marsha, we would stay combatants. Or
Yes.
I could say, my self-respect as an agent, what do I want? I'm at the grocery store. I didn't come here for a cage match. I came here to get some olives. So I'm going to look at the reality. I'm going to take the responsibility of being responsible for myself, no matter what I'm hearing, no matter what people are doing. I don't have to get into her war. I'm responsible for myself. I can choose to listen to my own ideas, pause, and because I do that, I now have options. And one of those options is to collaborate with her and say, are you okay? One of those options is to collaborate with everybody else in the line and just ignore her and not make it take
Mm-hmm.
longer. And so there are many options, but the idea, all of those options that you're talking about in turning towards peace instead of escalation, or returning violence with violence, all of them seem to end in a way where you feel, you have stayed true to your mission, you have not escalated the situation, and you've given this other woman, the woman who came at you, you've given her some options too, haven't you?
Yes, I know. I have.
You've given
And
her,
I don't
because
know how she's going to take those options, but that's her piece of it.
and that's her piece of it, which is a point I really want to get at. We can only be responsible for ourselves. And sometimes that hurts so badly. And we hear that in the way we hear Marsha. If Marsha could have done anything to make those children leave the little girl in blue alone, what sacrifice do you think she would have made to have that happen? And sometimes we just can't do it. There was nothing that Marsha was in a position to do short of violence that could have allowed those kids to stop. And here's the problem with violence. Let's say that Marsha had gone in and punched all those kids in the nose. Would it have guaranteed they stopped?
No, no,
Right. The more
no.
violence doesn't guarantee it stops. As a matter of fact, as we're seeing, it usually means it ends up getting worse until somebody drops a bomb so big everybody's destroyed, right?
Well, that is true. That is true. And I would have probably been their next so-called victim, then I would have been an outcast, yes, that's a wonderful point to bring up, Stone. Yes, violence begets violence. So yes.
So what I'm hearing you say is that when you're in a situation where you're bullied, the first idea is to stop and to listen and to say what was just said to me. It's to stop and say, I'm going to experience my emotions here for a second. That hurt. And all of this is an internal dialogue. It's an internal conversation. You're talking to yourself, but that's rhetoric and composition nonetheless, right? Because you're talking to yourself and making very conscious choices the same way somebody does when they write a paper. You're choosing to react to a situation by having a conversation with yourself. And the ends to that conversation is, this person did this to me. I'm going to do what's true for my path, which is to stop for a second and first say, ouch, that hurt. Let me think what they were saying and then assess the situation. Sometimes it's appropriate to ask questions and sometimes it's not.
Right.
Does that
Right.
describe the situation? Now let's imagine if we're in a situation where somebody bullies us and we go through it and they come back and bully us a second day. At that point, we probably need to do what? How do we know, because I think you and I are going to have to just make this statement that violence is never going to be the answer. So if somebody bullies us over 2 or 3 days and we get to the point where we can say, is there something I could do to help you? Is there an outfit you'd prefer for me to wear tomorrow that might make things work differently? Right. And the bullying continues. At that point, if we're in a situation like at school, for example, what do we do? Do we just sit there and take it? Or should we
Mhm.
reach out? What would you advise?
Mhm. Well, I'm so grateful for what my girl in blue, my friend, what she chose. She found an ally, and it turned out to be me. And so we turn we want to have allies, whether it's friends or siblings or some other family member or not. Somebody in the neighborhood who seems like a really good person who, and and sometimes we feel like we don't have allies, and maybe that's a reality for it. I doubt it's a reality for some people. So then this is where it starts to automatically getting I mean, you're going inside yourself or you're going to your ally, and then you're thinking, okay, this is why we have when we look at this is why people who hate politics, or when you say they'll say, I'll say, oh, I'm involved with rhetoric, and then they'll go, ooh, that's politics. That's because they think it's all bad. So
Right.
I'm going to say, so you go to your teacher, you go to your principal, so you work up the so-called ladder in a school system if that's where you're being bullied, or you go to the playground, who's taking care of the playground at the time. I go to the grocery store manager and says, I just want to let you know about this. I just got bullied, and we wouldn't want that to happen to other customers. Maybe you should know about this. But you you kind of work up from like another individual person to in the context. Who else is involved in this? Um, and I know some people have gone to their leaders in their spiritual leaders, in their situations. None of these are all foolproof. Some of them have been very damaging in search of an ally. Um,
But that is the next step, and
is
beyond the
that
shadow of
does
a
that
doubt.
sound right to you?
I think so. I think finding an ally is your next step. And
Mhm.
I had this dog named Philip, and he was an Afghan hound, and he was huge. And for the longest time, when I was a very little girl, he was my ally. And I
Mhm.
realized it when you said ally, and talk about something that'll make you want to cry. And I would go to fill up with this little brush, and Afghans, for people who don't know, have very long hair. And he was a great big dog, and he was not like into this little bookish girl playing with him, but he put looking back, I could see how much he just tolerated me. But I would go and lie down on him and brush his hair and just tell him everything and just say, oh, Philip, you're never going to believe what happened, and they're so much better at this than I was. And so he was my ally. and and
Yes, yes,
and
yes.
and please understand, y'all, I knew he couldn't. I mean, even then, I knew he couldn't really talk, and I knew he wasn't going to respond to me. And yet part of me thought he did. But it was just a place where I could go and talk out my ideas, and he was never going to tell, and he was never going to do anything about it. He was just going to lie there and put up with me brushing his hair. And so sometimes an ally doesn't even have to be a real person. An ally can be a favorite tree that you sit in to read a book, or an ally can
Yes.
be a pet that you take care of every day. Just to know that you have some place to go to put your ideas out in words, whether it's on paper or telling your puppy, you can't believe what happened to me today. And I think that gets back. You cannot expect people to just take it and never get it out. And I think one of the most
Oh yeah.
important things I've learned in working in the profession of rhetoric and composition for more than 20 years is that words are as real and as tangible as cancer, as guns, as anything out there. And if you don't do something with words, they can really goof you up. They can make you have an
Yes.
eating disorder. Some studies suggest they can bring on disease. They can keep you from sleeping. I mean, words can just do such terrible things. And so if you're in a situation where you don't know where an ally is, I guarantee you there's a bird on your windowsill. There's a dog in the neighborhood. There's a plant that's blooming. I think of my grandmother's aloes out to the side of the house that I used to love to go play. And sometimes I'd just sit out there and talk. And it's
Mhm.
just this idea that once you have made the choice to be courageous enough to be better, to say whatever anybody wants to say about me or do about me, I may not, like my grandmother Eleanor used to say, I may not be the best in town, but I'll be the best till the best comes around. And there's a lot of logic and a lot of wisdom in that,
Yeah,
Marsha. You know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's a lot of logic in that. You know, there may be somebody better than me out there, but whoever I am, I deserve not to feel bad. And I think we're all going
Yes.
to agree right now to agree that. And when somebody says something ugly about me, one of two things happen. They're either really a lost soul and just a creep, or they're a troubled soul that maybe a few questions could help. But whatever happens, I deserve to be here and I deserve to have a chance at this life. And so I'm going to take that act of bullying. I'm going to pause and I'm going to work on it over time because, Marsha, you know I've worked on it just as you have. I'm going to work at it over time to try to hold my tongue, to try to feel my pain, to try to react in the situation. And then when it's appropriate, I'm going to go get myself an ally and get all that nasty stuff out of me. And maybe that ally is me calling Marsha just to whining and complaining. And maybe that ally is a pet or whatever the case may
Yes.
be. But I think that the idea that you have this choice is something that I wish I had known earlier. And I think that it's something that I'm really grateful that we have an expert and the founder of Rhetoricians for Peace and somebody who's committed to our family and to our life and Dr. Marsha Lee Baker to open up this dialogue, that we have some very tangible tools, everybody, that once we decide that we're going to take ownership of our life, if somebody bullies us or perceives our bullying, we're going to make some choices. We're going to either, if it's a safe space, we're going to say, why did you do that? Or how can I help you? If it's not a safe space, we're going to calm down. We're going to assess the situation. And after it's over, we're going to go find an advocate, whatever that means. And we're going to get those nasty feelings of being bullied out of us. And we're going to live to fight another day, aren't we, Marsha?
Yes, we are, Stone. Yes,
Yes,
we
we
are.
are. Well, I would
And we'll,
like to
and we'll,
invite you back for another day in the coming months. Is that something you might be interested in?
I would love that. I, I feel honored. I'm thrilled. But I've always loved you and our relationship as in the academic setting and we continue together as learners. And I would love to.
Isn't that funny how somebody teaching me how to respect myself has turned into respect for each other and now respect for all our listens? Marsha, I got to tell you something. I think that rhetorician for peace thing is getting somewhere.
Oh, baby. It's powerful thought, powerful move, powerful combination. Let's all join. Let's all be rhetoricians for peace. And we don't even have to join anything. We just say, that's part of my agency. That's who I am. It's
That's
my
who I
means.
am. That's who I am. Everybody listening, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Dr. Marsha Lee Baker, for the great tools on learning how to respect ourselves, choose our purpose, and find our collaborators and our allies. Everybody have a wonderful day and be well.